the Dialed In Angling podcast presented by Onyx Fish, Runnings, Arneson's Rocky Point Resort, Man Trap Lake Lodge, Visit Watertown, South Dakota, and Visit Cook County. Well, this week I am actually sitting in Cook County. We are up the Gunflint Trail. I took a little drive this morning, left my hometown of Moose Lake, Minnesota, to venture north. You know, this area is special to me because I spent a lot of time in my youth in Cook County. Even though, you know, I grew up in Moose Lake, the North Shore was sort of our up north, right? So I always traveled up to Cook County. And as I was driving up here, it was amazing. Just the thoughts and the memories started firing back at me. Like, you know, I was telling Chad, I'm going to introduce my guests here in a minute who I'm sitting with, but I was telling Chad the story. I remember jumping in the back of my dad's buddy's pickup truck. He had a camper. We loaded up our gear. We were heading up to the Boundary Waters. You head up the North Shore, stopping at Russ Kendall's and getting some smoked fish. We continued our journey north. We'd stop in Tofty. That was our first spot as kids to kind of get out, run around, burn some energy. We were cliff diving off of areas into Lake Superior. I just remember all that. And as I was driving up here, those memories just started firing back at me. And, you know, in today's world, I sort of dated myself talking about riding up in the back of a pickup truck all the way to the North Shore. And then as a result into the Boundary Waters, you'd probably be arrested today. But back then that was just a thing everybody did. You know, you jumped in the back of a truck, everybody was free. Getting up to the Boundary Waters, there weren't, you know, the permits and the things that you have today. We just went fishing, right? We jumped in our canoes and loaded up. And if you found a open campsite, that was it. You know, you were just free as a bird. I remember canoeing and portaging into areas with paper maps, and we didn't really even have an idea of where we were going. It was just like, let's just portage and get into some of these lakes that we haven't fished and explore. And so driving up here, you know, that sense of exploration just starts firing back at me. You know, I think of other times of coming up here when I was in college. I had some college roommates from Grand Marais. So, you know, we obviously gravitated towards each other in the dorms because you start introducing to each other, and everybody moves in the dorms when they're freshmen, right? And you're kind of introducing yourself. Hey, where are you from? Where are you from? Oh, I'm from Moose Lake, Minnesota. Where the heck's that? Well, my roommates that were on my level, they're like, well, we're from Grand Marais. So instantly, you know, we started hanging out, and there was a connection there. I remember coming to Grand Marais, snowmobiling, going to Lutsen, driving up that same drive up the North Shore after a snowstorm. And it was just picturesque. It literally looked like Bob Ross painted every section of road on the way up here. And so driving up here just sort of spurred those memories for me. I couldn't be happier to be here. When I turned up the Gunflint Trail and I hit that road, it was like going back in time. And it truly is a special place, not only just in Minnesota, but on the planet. This is a cool area. My guests that are sitting down with me share the same passion for not only Cook County, but the Gunflint Trail, the Boundary Waters, everything that this area of wilderness and piece of heaven have to offer. And so I'm going to let them tell their story of how they got here, why they got here, what they do here, why they're passionate about this area. And I guarantee you, coming up for this podcast, I will be back, because driving up Lake Superior, I know listeners, if you tune into the podcast, you know that my newfound or refound love for Lake Superior trout fishing, you know, is definitely on my radar every time I come near this lake. Even when I go to Duluth for, like, when I hit up Menards, like, that's all I'm thinking about is lake trout fishing on Lake Superior. So that's in my mind. So I want to get back up here, lake trout fishing. As I was driving through these areas too, it's like, oh man, we could stay there. The family could come up here. I'm always looking for adventure type of trips. I want to introduce my guests. They're obviously here because they're adventurous, and I want to hear their story. Let's start with Chad. Chad, can you introduce yourself?
You bet. Thanks, Tony. Thanks for coming up here and making the trip. I'm Chad Kieper. My wife and I live at the end of the Gunflint Trail, or near the end of the Gunflint Trail, and we've been up here for 3 years now. And from the time we moved up here, I started a little guiding business up here. half my business is paddling, half of it's motorboat, but most of it's centered around fishing, but not all of it. Some folks just want to come up and paddle in the boundary waters for a while. But we picked this part of the state to move because to us, my wife and I, we love the outdoors. We're boundary waters kids, grew up coming up here with our families. And to us, the end of the Gunflint Trail is one of the last wild places left in Minnesota. There's some great places in Minnesota, and I love our state, the whole state. But just for us personally, this is where we wanted to be. We wanted to have access to the wilderness. We wanted to be surrounded by the wilderness, no neighbors, just kind of a little more remote lifestyle. So that's why we're here.
That's awesome. When you drive down the Gunflint too, it feels like you're going to the end of the road and that's it, and then I've always had that feeling like every time I come up the Gunflint Trail, it's like, this is it. This is the end of the road.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Okay. Our next guest, Joe.
Yeah. I'm good to meet you today, Tony. Really nice to meet you. My name is Joe Friedrichs. I live outside of Grand Marais and come fishing up the Gunflint very regular, including with Chad and Paul, and I have been out too in the boundary waters and done some ice fishing together. I moved up here about 12 years ago, and I have a podcast about the boundary waters, primarily called the Paddle and Portage Podcast. Been working in media up here the whole time I've been here. Worked at WTIP Radio for about 10 years doing local news for them, and had a Boundary Waters podcast there, and just saw the interest in this area from all across the country about the boundary waters. I mean, this is a place that's just cherished by not just Minnesotans, but Chicago and Indiana and Colorado. People come here from all over the place. So to tell the stories of the people who come here and our own adventures in the wilderness is a huge part of my life, and getting out there is an important part of the podcast. And yeah, it's just great to meet you today. I mean, I've been listening to your podcast for a while and checking it out, and your recent trip out on Superior when you were doing the vertical jigging for trout, it was just getting me stoked for ice fishing, which is when I do vertical jigging for lake trout. And hearing you go out with your uncle, who's a legend. I mean, you're a legend, but he is like next level stuff. And that late ice trip that you guys did was really cool. So it's a pleasure to meet you today and honored to be here.
Yeah, awesome. Paul?
Yes, thanks, Tony. I'm Paul Zak. I am a professional retired guy. I bought a place up here probably 8 years ago, retired up here maybe 5 years ago, and live here more or less full time. But my background with the area is very similar to Tony's. I grew up in Cloquet, Minnesota, which is just a few miles north of Moose Lake, and very similar. In the summertime, you get a group of guys, and you're done for the day with a summer job or for the weekend, and get the truck, throw a few canoes on top, and strap them down, and come on up the Gunflint Trail, and it never gets old turning up the trail from Grand Marais. It's just a whole new feeling. Once you make that turn, you've gone through the cities, you've gone through Duluth, and now you're in the wilderness. And it never gets old. You might do it 50 times a year, and it's just that same special feeling when you make that turn. So I do a lot of fishing up here. I fish lakes up here 4 or 5 days a week, and been doing that for several years. And going back to the high school, college days, we used to come up and fish Memorial Day weekend every weekend, catch a bunch of lake trout. And what's nice about the area is the sheer diversity of the fishery. If you want bass, there's bass. If you want northerns, there's northerns. There's walleyes. There's lake trout. There's stocked trout of various species. It's just a wonderful area. It just never gets old, and there's just a mystique to catching some of these fish and paddling some of these waters in those deep, gin clear lakes. And there is a mystique about pulling a lake trout out of 50, 60 feet of water in the boundary waters in a canoe. Never gets old.
I agree. Like I said, my story coming through Cook County was the boundary waters. That's how I started coming up to this area. But, as I get older, I guess maybe kids get in the way, jobs get in the way, whatever, that, everything that I do in fishing, I haven't been to the boundary waters in years, but just coming up here and seeing the amount of lakes outside the boundary waters and the amount of fisheries outside the boundary waters, not just the boundary waters canoe area, but just the vast wilderness, even driving in, like Chad and I were talking about, there's grouse on the side of the road. Well, it's fall, man. I'm thinking grouse hunting, right? So I'm seeing all these grouse on the side of the road. And it is super intriguing area to me, just because almost everywhere you go up that road from the Gunflint Trail, but even before you get there, it's like public access, lake access, lake trail, lake access, and it's like endless. I mean, this is definitely an area where you could come up to and fish different lakes every single day and probably do it for the rest of your lifetime or retirement and not hit them all. Let's start for, some of the experiences you like doing up here. It could be fishing wherever, even in the wilderness areas, or some of the things you like doing. Because I know Sag, for example, that sort of leads into Canada and Quetico and all of that is outside of Cook County. So, what are some of your favorite things to do? Let's start with Chad, and then we'll just kind of go around Joe and then Paul as well.
Well, I mean, definitely fishing is the top of my list. I mean, that's what I love to do. No problem. I do chase grouse too. I love doing that. Chase a few hare in the fall as well into the winter. But if I'm not on the water, I love to hike. And there's incredible hiking opportunities up here as well. We've got the Border Route Trail that runs all the way basically from Grand Portage through this whole area. Different side spurs, trails, that kind of thing. Nice overlooks, trips to waterfalls, that kind of thing. So whenever I have clients come up here with families, oftentimes the families will split up and do different activities, right? It'll be, a couple of people in my boat going out fishing, and the rest of the family has to find something to do. And there's no shortage of things to do. They can go berry picking. We have an amazing little naturalist history museum up here called Chickawauk at the end of the trail. That's a great place to check out. Great resorts with gift shops, amazing outfitters up here.
That's where the state record walleye is on display. Okay,
it is. Yeah. When Leroy, the gentleman who caught it, passed away, his family generously donated it to the Chickawauk Museum because it was caught in the waters right around there in the Seagull River, which isn't too far from Chickawauk Museum. So yeah, people can come up and visit that. Little known fact, though, the state record splake is also housed in the Naturalist Center there at Chickawauk, so you can get a twofer. You can come up and see 2 state records for the price of one admission, so that's kind of cool. But for me personally, I love to snowshoe as well. In the wintertime, my wife and I are out in the woods all the time. Amazing cross-country ski trails here. The Banadad Ski Trail is one of the longest maintained ski trails in the wilderness in the nation is up here, so there's no shortage of things to do. If you don't want to fish, come paddle, come hike, go swimming. We got some little beaches up here. It's just fantastic.
I would just walk down the rivers. I would literally get dropped off. My parents would drop me off at a bridge, and I would walk down and fish all day long. Are there hiking trails where you can hike into, let's say, secluded trout lakes or area streams where you can catch trout and sort of hike up and down those areas?
Yeah, there's definitely secluded lakes. You can get as secluded as you want. And one of the nice things about this area is it's not just the diversity of the fishery, but some of these lakes you go into, you won't see anybody. You have the whole lake to yourself oftentimes, and you don't get crowded in like some of the other lakes in the state. Yeah.
But we don't really
That's
have
cool.
like,
I just always incorporate everything with fishing. So if I'm going hiking, I'm bringing a fishing rod. If so I just always think of fishing as like first and foremost. If I go sailing, my wife always says, I remember we went out to Seattle, Washington one time, and we were going sailing. I'm like, I'm not sailing without bringing a fishing rod. So I always incorporate, like, if I'm going to hike somewhere, I'm hiking with a fishing rod. So that's why I asked the question. All right, Joel?
Yeah. First of all, where we're at down here at the end of the Gunflint, Seagull, Sag, Paul and Chad, this is their turf. These guys know this area much better than I do. It's big water down here. And what I like about how Chad and Paul fish this area is they're multi-approach. So they'll get in a motorboat on Seagull, Sag, but they'll also hop in a canoe. I know Paul paddles with his wife and gets into the boundary waters, goes fishing. And Chad takes his guests out there from Gunflint Wilderness Guide Service. Like, he's one of the guys that goes in a canoe out to the boundary waters, which is something that I really appreciate on these bigger lakes down here. I got most of my start around here in the mid Gunflint Trail area, like Poplar Lake, which is kind of right there in the middle of the trail, has trail center and some of the resorts on it and so forth. So fishing smaller bodies, always in a canoe. I don't have a motorboat. I'm strictly a canoe angler and primarily inside the wilderness line. A lot of smaller walleye lakes this time of year, September, early September and through the summer months. But ice fishing for me is really a huge part of why I moved here, why I continue to live here. And that can be done too. And in the mid Gunflint area, there's some good trout lakes all along those border lakes. A lot of them have trout and some big trout. And like what Paul's saying, just if you see another angler, that's a busy day. Like one other person's like, whoa, somebody else is out here. Kind of a busy day around here. And that's just such a unique feature from where I grew up in Iowa, and I lived in Montana and Oregon, and I've fished trout all over the country, but there's just nothing like Gunflint Trail, BWCA, lake trout ice fishing. I mean, just the solitude, the quality of the fishing, the duration of the season. To me, it's the best fishing that I've ever done, and that includes these places, Montana, Oregon, these fisheries that are renowned across the world. And for me, this is the best. This is as good as it gets right here. Mid-trail for me, but I'm learning a lot from these guys about this Seagull Sag area and what this area has to offer, and it's just incredible.
Yeah, it is incredible. And, my principal activity is the fishing, much like Chad, but, you can go out there and have a bad day fishing and it's still a great day. Even if you get skunked every once in a while, just like in the wintertime, just the hike out to some of these lakes is just gorgeous. Something is just very special. Doesn't matter how cold it gets, you can dress for that. My favorite time up here is the winter time, actually. But yeah, my principal activity is fishing. Chad mentioned the state record walleye came out of these waters, actually only a couple hundred yards from where my cabin sits right now. Part of the Seagull River, actually. This is public knowledge, so it's posted everywhere. But they have that Seagull River closed now at the time of the year that fish was caught, which was during the spawn. So over the years, the regulations have tightened up, and that's one thing that people have to be aware of up here. There are a lot of rules and regulations that you have to abide by, and if you're going out on some of the border lakes, now you've got two countries to worry about licenses and permits and regulations and what the limits are and so on. So, but if you get yourself literate on all of that, it's just a wonderful experience. And again, not just the fishing, but paddling, kayaking, just sitting out on the deck, having a cup of coffee. Or one of my favorite things is watching the northern lights at night. The night sky up here, it's a night sky sanctuary in the Superior National Forest. And it can be a stunning experience, Milky Way and whatever.
Well, we're going to take a quick break, fellas. When I come back, I want to talk a little bit about permitting and some of the rules that Joe touched on ice fishing. Paul was talking a little bit about ice fishing. That intrigues me as well. I want to get into all of that stuff and just chat and pick your brains about, if someone's going to come up summer and winter, what do they need to do? What do they need to look for? What do they need to look up? Where are good places to kind of find all of this information? So stay tuned. When we come back to Dialed In Angling, we're going to dive into that with the fellas. Stay tuned.
Man Trap Lodge, a Park Rapids resort on beautiful Big Man Trap Lake. Features 16 decked-out private cabins with air conditioning, Wi-Fi, and a rare Northwood swimming pool. Cabins are available with 1 to 5 bedroom units to select from. Whether you're looking for a fishing trip, a family vacation, or a family reunion, Man Trap Lodge is the Park Rapids resort for you. Rent one of our fishing boats for a great day of fishing or a pontoon to cruise around the lake and relax. Man Trap Lodge is a truly magical Minnesota vacation spot that's fun for the whole family. Don't miss your chance to book your late summer or fall trip at Man Trap Lodge for some fantastic fishing. Check us out at mantraplodge.com.
Runnings Home, Farm, and Outdoor stores are celebrating 78 years, serving 90 local communities across the Upper Midwest, the Northeast, and America's Heartland. Runnings has everything you and your family need for your home, on the farm, and in the outdoors. Lawn and garden, hardware, farm and ranch supplies, sporting goods, housewares, snacks, and everything for your pets. Go to runnings.com to find one of the 90 locations near you or shop online anytime at runnings.com. Runnings, your home, farm, and outdoor store.
Watertown, South Dakota is your hub for year-round fishing in the heart of the Glacial Lakes region. With Lakes Kempeska and Pelican right in town and dozens more just a short drive away, you'll find non-stop action for walleye, perch, and pike, just to name a few. When you're off the water, explore the Terry Redland Art Center, Bramble Park Zoo, and many other great museums. Plus, award-winning pizza and family-friendly fun around every corner. Easy to reach, hard to leave. Plan your next cast at visitwatertownsd.com. So much Watertown, so little time.
Okay, so our next conversation, we are going to ask the panel here. My guys are super pumped to be here. Super pumped about this area, but I am as well. Matter of fact, when we landed here today, we pulled into the outfitter. We were going to go get our permit to get on the water. And there was a gentleman in the front entryway, and he was literally sort of lost. Like, he drove up here from the Twin Cities or wherever, and he couldn't find any lodging, so he slept in his truck. He wasn't sure on the regulations, where he could drive his boat, where he couldn't drive his boat, where the motorized were. He didn't know where the boundary waters lines were, which is pretty common. A lot of people, they're unsure. There's Paul was touching on, there's all these different regulations as far as fishing, limits, that sort of thing. Let's start with Joe, because we could start with canoes and some of the things that are going on, some of the headlines that may be taking place right now. But let's start with you first, and then we can bounce ideas back. Because, for me, just driving up here blindly this morning, I sort of would have been that guy. I'd have just been like, where can I fish? Where can I put my boat? What are the limits? Because I just, with no prior knowledge, you can sort of get lost.
Right. I think the two biggest ones are the international border with Canada and the wilderness line for the boundary waters. I'll start with the international border because there's some headlines around the state right now and across the country actually about remote area border crossing permits, which are something pretty unique to this part of the world, Northeast Minnesota. And it's under review right now by Canada. And this allows us, Paul, Chad, and I, and all the people that just cross on SAG into Canada, where the fishing's really good in the winter and all year, is without having to go through customs. So we apply for these special permits, these remote RABC permits, they're called. It's the acronym. And Canada put a pause on issuing renewals for them last year, right around this time in September. And it's, if you had one, you got it renewed. If you didn't have one, you couldn't get one this year. And these permits are huge for cabin owners that have property on the Canadian side of some of these border lakes here, like Sag at the end of the Gunflint. If they don't renew these, that's going to make a major disruption for ability to access this part. Getting into Quetico from end of the Gunflint at Cache Bay here, like it's basically not going to happen anymore. And so to find out the news on this, there are people on the edge of their seat, not just us, common anglers and so forth who like to get in there, but these property owners, the other guides, people that want to go into Quetico Park itself. And we're waiting right now from CBSA, Canada Border Services Agency, to issue a sort of a final ruling on what's going to happen with these moving forward. The program could continue as it is. It might end. Nobody knows. We're literally waiting. No, Representative Stauber's been pretty involved. Our congressman that represents us up here in this 8th congressional district for Minnesota, in trying to get some answers on this. He's been pushing Canada for about a year now to get some of that answers. And there's a meeting at the end of this month that may or may not have some sort of involvement in the outcome of that. But it's a huge deal right now for people that cross the border without having to go through customs. So that's one issue that's in the news. I'm a journalist up here, so it's something I followed extensively. I've written many, many articles about it. And then the wilderness line is the other big one that people don't know exactly what that means. And the biggest thing is non-motorized. So on a lake like Seagull or Sag, you got to know that stuff. You have to get educated, as Paul was saying. Like, you need to know what you're doing when you come up to this place. And it's not that hard. People like Chad can fill you in, like professional outfitting, guiding services that will be more than happy to answer these questions for you so that you don't end up in this situation like this gentleman that you ran into this morning at the outfitter going, well, where am I and what do I do? Like, there are people here who want to help you that have the answers for those. I mean, those businesses up and down the Gunflint, you can find them on Visit Cook County's website. They've got a whole list of the guides and outfitters that will help you answer that so that because otherwise you're wasting time when you get up here trying to find the answers where it's all available before you come up.
Yeah, I mean, Chad was over talking to the gentleman right away. Well, both you guys were, and just really, really very helpful to direct the gentleman in the right direction. But I always tell people when they go to locations, hire a guide or an outfitter. I do it as a guide. I'm a guide myself. But when I go to somewhere new, whether it's backwaters of Florida, Texas, Louisiana, I could drag my boat down there and do it, but I might wreck my lower unit. I might be in waters I'm not supposed to be in, all of that stuff. You can learn so quickly from a guide, and that learning curve gets cut in half to the point where you're ready to go and you're going to be doing it right within one day of being with that individual rather than finding out the hard way.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the way to do it. And Joe was alluding about the wilderness boundaries as well, and the permitting for that is a whole different animal, right? And most people, when they think about going into the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness, they think about overnight permits, right? We're going to go camping overnight in the Boundary Waters. But there's a lot of different types of permits. So Seagull and Sag are good examples. Sag in particular, one, it has a 25 horse limit on it. So you can't come up with a motor bigger than 25. But you also need a day use motor permit for that. If you're going to camp by boat overnight, you need an overnight motor permit for that. But what people forget about too is you can, at any point on a paddle only trip, you can do a day use permit right at a box, right at a landing. So if someone is coming up here and they aren't overnight camping, or they just got up here and blanked on getting a permit, you're not boxed out of the Boundary Waters completely. You can rent a canoe if you don't have your own, and you can fill out a permit at a box at the landing you want to go into, and go and have a great time in the Boundary Waters for the day. You've got to come back out before nightfall, or before you can't stay overnight. Same in the wintertime. It's the permitting process is much more, I shouldn't say lax, but it's easier to get access because you don't need the overnight permits through recreation.gov. You can access overnight permits from those same boxes at the landing. So there are ways for people, even last minute, to be able to get in the Boundary Waters and enjoy their time. And if you're coming up here and you're like, hey, I want to go in the Boundary Waters for a day and I don't have my own equipment, like you alluded to, contact one of these outfitters up here. They're fantastic. We have amazing outfitters up here, very professional. They've been doing these for decades, and they'll get boats to you, get you in the right equipment, and get you out there with maps and go out and enjoy a day in the Boundary Waters. Amazing resources up here.
Yeah, and I know that I believe the permits in the entire forest management plan is under review right now. Is that correct to your knowledge? In that the last update was almost 30 years ago, maybe. Joe, do you know more about this?
Yeah, I mean, they're reviewing the forest plan. I don't know if like quota is necessarily going to be factored into that extensively, but they're definitely reviewing the price for an overnight permit is something that's under review right now. And you know, I mean, that's not necessarily something that people need to get too bogged down. I mean, this is a fishing podcast, you know, Tony, like that's the thing about your show is like, we're here, you know, hopefully talking about fishing a little bit more, because these guys have caught more 30-inch walleye. Like, don't let their humble nature fool you. I mean, these dudes, Paul in particular, this guy like catches huge walleye, and he's very humble about his approach, and maybe, you know, there's some secretive nature to it too. We don't need to dive into where he catches them. But Paul, if you would you tell us like what it's like when you're setting that hook on a 30-inch walleye, because a lot of people haven't experienced that in their life.
First of all, the secret is shots on goal, time on the water.
Right.
And I put in a lot of it. But yeah, there's just nothing like, it's just an adrenaline rush. And you can go out there and spend 8-hour day just to get one of those things, or even to just have one on, even if it gets away. And you know what it is instantly. It's one of those they call them hog walleyes, HAWG, and 28 inches and over is considered a hog walleye. And it, like I say, it's just, that'll keep you on a high for a good couple of weeks, just one of those in the boat, just to see it. And they're all released. I release, in fact, over 90% probably of the fish I catch of all sorts. I keep a few to eat, but most of them go back in the water, particularly those big ones. But yeah, there's nothing like it. Just when you see that big fish finally make its way into the net and flopped over into the boat, and then you're on the clock. You got to get it off the hook and then back in the water, safe and sound. But back to the RABC, I just wanted to make one note on that I was talking to the Cache Bay ranger a few days ago. Peter, yes. Peter and Stacy are a couple that are the rangers at the Cache Bay entry point to Quetico. And I oftentimes will bring them out there and back in the towboat service from the outfitter. And so I get a chance to talk to them quite a bit. And they did say that this year, I believe, they said trips through Cache Bay into Quetico Park are down about, I think he said 70% due to this permit issue. So it's good news if you've got a permit. You're going to have your choice of campsites and fishing spots, and you're not going to see many people. But they also had no idea where that situation is going.
There's a lot of anxious people.
And speaking of too, knowing motor boundaries and stuff, there are stories of people flying in motorboats. It's not just you can have motors on Sag and Seagull, but there's a boundary beyond which even on those lakes you can't take motors. And every year I see people do that, and some of it's ignorance and some of it might be intentional. We don't know. But
well, like today, where we were at, I mean, you could obviously see boundaries. I mean, most people I think will acknowledge that and see that. Absolutely gorgeous everywhere we went. We were in the motorized area, but we were in the 10 horse or less for the most part. Yeah, with Chad. One last thing on permitting, but then I want to get into fishing techniques and stuff. Chad is a great person to get a hold of. Outfitters up here are great people to get a hold of. If you have any questions, no doubt if you call them up, they can tell you the right steps in what to do, where they rent boats. If you're looking for a canoe trip, boat trips, no doubts there. I want to just ask you guys one quick question about winter, because I was sort of intrigued. I was questioning Chad, like, if you go into the wilderness area, can you bring an electric auger, or is it hand auger? Chad was saying hand auger. What are some of the rules there with live bait? And then also getting in and out of those areas, kind of walk us through a little bit how you do your guide trips, Chad. Joe, maybe how you guys do your trips, because I love, I would snowshoe in or dog sled in or do whatever I had to do to get into some of those areas, because you want to talk about untouched resources and no one around in the winter. That's very intriguing to me.
Yeah. I'll tell you. So for me, guiding in the winter, you tailor it to what the clients want to do and their physical abilities, because you don't want to come up here unprepared and to go snowshoeing into the Boundary Waters wilderness if you don't have the right gear. It's just downright dangerous, and you're just putting other people at jeopardy who have to come in and rescue you. So making sure you have the right gear is step number one. If you don't know what that gear is, once again, talk to a guide, talk to an outfitter, that sort of thing. So I do a combination of things. I have clients who come up and just want to fish off the side of a snowmobile. And there's lakes up here, like you alluded to earlier, Tony, that require no permits. There's no motor restrictions. You can go anywhere you want on the lake. So Gunflint Lake is a good example. Loon Lake. These are lakes where you could snowmobile up and down anywhere you want and fish off a snowmobile, which is great. Some people love to do that. I love to do that. And sometimes the conditions warrant that you fish that way. Other people want a little bit more adventure. That is, we can either snowshoe completely from the public landing all the way into the Boundary Waters. We can go multiple portages in, multiple lakes in. And some folks even camp. Joe's a great winter camper. He can tell you more about his love of that. So some people go and do overnight fishing trips into the Boundary Waters and camp in hot tents or just cold tents and with the right gear. Most of my clients want to do a hybrid of it, where I snowmobile to the wilderness boundary, whether it be on Seagull, Sag, or any other lake up here. Park the snowmobile, strap on the snowshoes, put the gear in the Polks or the Duluth packs, and we snowshoe in and spend the day. We bring insulated hubs and little propane heaters, so we're comfortable. We're out of the wind usually, and get it pretty toasty in there. And we mainly chase trout here in the wintertime. That's whether it be lake trout or stream trout in lakes. And that's sort of my bread and butter in the winter is either a full-on snowmobile trip or a hybrid. And I'd say 90% of my trips are those hybrid trips. People want to get into that wilderness.
Now you're talking my language. Jigging lake trout in the winter, I'm all in, especially in areas where there's no people. That's why I love, I do a lot of Canadian trips where we snowmobile in and there's just no one around. No one's drilled a hole there. I love jigging lake trout in the winter. As far as your gear, when you're going in, let's say you get a year with a lot of snow, right? And you're snowshoeing in and you're talking about bringing a lot of gear. Me as a guide, I'm always packing in tons of gear, like probably way more than we need. As most anglers do, they bring way more than they absolutely need. Do you use sleds with high facts? Are you using like toboggan style sled? I mean, what are some of your sleds and some of your gear that you're using if you're walking in?
All the above. I mean,
or backpacks only.
Yeah.
I think everybody has their own little invention.
I think so.
Some people strap a box on the back. Chad puts a big box on the back of a rather large snowmobile.
Yeah.
Other people will tow otter sleds with the high facts. I've seen a whole variety of contraptions out there to get across the ice.
Oh yeah. There's a lot of just homebrew stuff out there that people do. For me, the sleds that I use to pull gear into the Boundary Waters is they're kind of like mini dog sleds, and I have high-fax runners on them that I basically just bought 4x8 sheets of it from Menards, ripped it down, and covered the skis with that, these wooden skis I have. And the reason why is the less surface area you have on the ice, the easier it is to pull. So some people call them Smitty sleds. So what I basically built are Smitty sleds. I find, and I've actually used my little handheld weigh scaler, fish scaler to do tests, pulling different loads of gear with either a bucket otter sled type style or my Smitty sleds or just a toboggan and shown that it's much easier to pull on Smitty sleds. So that's the way I prefer to pull gear in. I use just harnesses with rigid poles, because if you're portaging up and down elevation, if you're going downhill and you don't have rigid poles attached to your sleds, you're going to get your ankles taken out, right? That sled's going to rifle down and take you out. Yeah, so a real big consideration to keep in mind is the actual conditions of the ice or the snow when you go out there. Was it 2 years ago we had like zero snow, right? Was it 2 or 3 winters ago?
2 years ago.
2 years ago. And you could pull a truck out there in sleds. I mean, the wind would blow and your sleds would blow past you. It was so easy to bring gear. You could with wood. Most years, though, with the amount of snowfall we get up here, it's slushy, heavy snow conditions. At that point, I'll really pare down. I won't bring ice houses or heaters or things like that. I basically, whatever I can fit in a Duluth pack is what I'm bringing, and maybe a rod case strapped on the side or something like that. But you really got to pare down because you're trying to snowshoe through piles of slush. It's brutal. So you got to be as light and mobile as you can.
We were talking in the boat about a couple winters ago when we had the winter that never was, right?
Yeah.
As awful it was of a winter as far as not being able to ice fish, especially in the lower tier of the ice belt, it was one of my favorite ice fishing years just because you could go anywhere in northern Minnesota for the most part. If you were safe, you were spud barring around, right? And the fishing was excellent and there was no snow. I love snow. Don't get me wrong. I love snowmobiling. I love everything about snow. But that particular year, as an ice angler, just solely, as an ice angler, I loved it.
Yeah,
Looking back, I know it was a terrible year for the industry. It was a terrible year for people that have guiding businesses like myself. I think I told you, Chad, in the boat, my guiding business was down like 50%. But just from an angler's perspective, you could go anywhere, it was, and you could see the ice, and there was, it was unfortunate that it was as warm as it was, because it actually, if you think back 2 years ago, it got really cold at the beginning of the season, and then it warmed up, and then just never really got that cold again, right?
Yeah.
If we would have had another couple weeks of that kind of that Arctic air, I think that ice season would have been the greatest ice season for everybody. But the fact that we had some rain and it just never really got to those Arctic conditions. It was a tough year, and it was for an outfitter, but from an angler's perspective, it was fantastic.
Well, I told you, Tony, real quick, half joking, but it was true. I had a bump in business that year because being this far north, we had good ice. And so I joke, I had these ice angling refugees. These are guys that canceled trips at Red Lake and that kind of thing. And they came up here because we had good ice. So I actually saw a nice little bump in my winter business that year.
That's what's cool about whenever I watch, like in the winter. I mean, I'm always dialed into the forecast, right? Because I'm an angler. I'm always looking at the wind. I'm looking at the treetops in the morning. Like, I'm always focused on weather. But in the winter, especially in the fall with dialed in angling, we're trying to figure out where we can go fishing, where we can get on early ice, where it's going to be safe, and do some filming. I always see Grand Marais always pops up. Grand Marais, or that, even if you get further north, like where you guys are up the Gunflint here, it's always much colder, right? Even in the summer months, Lake Superior is a big air conditioner. So it'll be 90 degrees in the Twin Cities or something. And you see Grand Marais 66, like perfect. It's like always the perfect conditions up in this area. Joe, let's talk a little more about your winter experiences. I know you're an avid ice angler. Kind of your setup, your gear, what you like chasing, where you like going. I have some buddies that are hardcore winter campers. They go on the boundary waters. They come in through the Ely side, but they're really into it. And, to the point where they make their own wall tents and like that, like they do it. They've got collapsible stoves, dog sleds. They have some incredible fishing stories of catching giant pike and just all these great experiences. And they have some really nasty ones of getting caught in storms and snowshoeing out through the middle of the night because the storm kept on building. So what are some of your favorite things to do, your gear setup? What are you looking forward to as we move towards winter?
Right. Yeah. Winter camping's become my thing. Definitely. We have a snow trekker canvas wall tent and a titanium stove that we use to stay warm in there relatively. We had one buddy, it was 30 below on New Year's, and the tent is warm. We call it hot camping, and he's like, yeah, I wouldn't say it's hot in here. That might not be the word, but you can sit comfortably at 40, 50 degrees in there when it's 30 below just outside the wall tent. And we use a simple Nils auger, which is a hand crank auger because it's non-motorized, where we go inside the wilderness line. And I mean, it's simple fishing, really. It's like lake trout are up in the shallows, so I use a Vexlar, just the old school like FL18 or one of the blue original looking one, nothing too fancy. And we'll set tip ups anywhere from 12 feet to 30 feet. I'll jig at like 30, 35 feet, somewhere in that is kind of a nice median zone, but oftentimes even find our best success at like 17 feet. Kind of seems to be a magic number for jig and lake trout. And it's a little more fun when you've got more of the water column to see them come screaming up like you guys were doing on Superior recently, where you get that chase and then it comes following the lure up and you're just doing that thing at like 50 feet. But there's nothing that's that hard about it. And I think that's why I was really drawn to it is, I don't have snowmobile. I don't have motorboat in the summertime. And to be able to get in via canoe or snowshoe and have high success and catch 30-inch lake trout or bigger on the regular it's so great because it's so approachable for somebody. It's not expensive is the biggest thing for somebody that's not looking to invest a lot but still wants to get in, have a wilderness experience. I mean, you got to process your own wood. Like, it's hard work. Winter camping is no joke. Your buddies can probably attest to is like, you got to first haul the gear in there on a polk sled, snowshoe, hawk ski, whatever you're going to do to get in there, set up camp, maybe set some tip-ups out, but then you got to be thinking about, all right, how are we going to stay warm tonight? Processing firewood. You're finding dead cedar, sawing it up, splitting it, birch, whatever you can find out there. And so it's not like it's some stroll through the park, but when you're out there and you're catching lake trout and you've got the tent set up and the smoke's coming out of the smokestack from a buddy in there making it go, it's as good as it gets. It's just unbelievable. I mean, we've caught so many nice 30-inch lake trout and that rod bends or that tip up, you see the flag up, you go sprinting over and that thing's helicoptering, spinning so fast that like your eyes can't even process how fast those things are running with the bait. You set that hook and then you get up and then they do those long runs like that. It's just like compared to fishing walleye in 10 feet of water, and there's kind of that slow pull down of the bobber in the big shack that you drove out in a pickup. And that's like a Minnesota cultural thing. There's no knock against it, but this is just such a different experience, so much more wild feeling that to me it's the best ice fishing in Minnesota is up here.
Yeah, I think so. Ice camping to me over the last few years, I do sort of the glamping. Right. My experience has been sort of the glamping. But Chad and I were talking in the boat today. I want to do more ice camping experiences where it's like a destination. Maybe it's an area that there's no lodging in the area, and that's why we're doing it. But also, I had Nick Linder on this podcast, and he does a lot of ice camping as well. And Nick was like, for me, ice camping, I just want to be fishing all the time and wake up and just start fishing, not wake up, start my snowmobile, drive to an area, snowshoe in like you guys, then start fishing, then pack up and get out. That's a prime example of why you winter camp. And so I've been looking at more destinations like where my son and I can go ice camping and maybe not as much glamping, but just getting out there and doing it to stay in the elements so we can fish around the clock. Because like I love early ice fishing situations. And in those situations, you can't drive the snowmobile out a lot of times. You can't drive, anything out. You've got to pack light with a sled. Well, now we can go out on, 4 inches ice, 4 or 5 inches ice on safe walkable ice with a spud bar, set up our camp, get everything set up, packed in, and just start fishing and being in that the whole time. So we're wasting less time traveling to that destination all the time. And we're in it for 24 hours a day. And time is precious. As you guys know, you only have a certain amount of time to do this. So why not do it for 24-hour period? Now, there's a lot of debate when it comes to winter camping and ice camping. There's a lot of anglers that say, well, you have to use only wood stove. Well, it makes sense in the boundary waters. You're not going to be carrying propane tanks on your back or anything like that. But I've been looking at it from a perspective because I've done a lot of camping, and every ice camping experience that I do, it seems like I get better and more proficient at it. And the proficient factor with wood, there's an up and a down. There's One, there's sort of the work element where it cuts away from the fishing to get the wood cut and the stove set up and all of that stuff. But the benefit of wood is it dries everything out. Okay. But also cutting the wood, like I grew up in a family, we always joke around, if you're not fishing or hunting, you're cutting wood. Like I grew up, we cut wood for the winter. My buddies would be out grouse hunting and doing all this cool stuff. And my dad would have, 10 cord of wood in the driveway. And that's what we did. And now, like I said, I would never burn wood, and I have an outside wood boiler, So, but I enjoy that. I enjoy collecting, gathering, the whole experience, not just the fishing experience, but the whole experience. And so my next winter camping experience, I'm looking at getting the collapsible wood stove, the pipe, the whole thing. Now, I work with Otter. Otter's coming out with some really cool new stuff. I don't want to tease it on the podcast quite yet because I don't want Otter to get mad at me. But trust me, in the next couple months, there's some really cool winter ice camping stuff that is going to be coming out that adventurers like us four are really going to be looking forward to. Products like that are on the market because they make ice camping easy and collapsible and attainable. And so that we'll have to save that for another podcast, but I got to see the full run of product lines, so I'm excited about it. Paul, are you a winter ice camper like us three geeks over here?
Not the camper. My setup is a little more simple. It's a snowmobile and a set of snowshoes, and you take the snowmobile as far as you can to the border of the Boundary Waters or Quetico, and then put on the snowshoes, strap them on, and head on in. And again, in the wintertime too, you do need the permits for if you're going to go to Quetico. You can take your snowmobile just so far, and then you have to hoof it, and you can get the permits online now for going into Quetico in the wintertime. But the other, I kind of put the walleyes on hold for the wintertime. I don't think there's a whole lot of heavy-duty walleye fishing up here in the winter. I think most people, myself included, target the trout, the lake trout and the stream trout. And like Joe was saying, there's just nothing like through an ice hole out of 40, 50 feet of water, bringing up one of those big lake trout. They take off like a locomotive, and they'll do 5 or 6 runs, peeling off your drag. There's nothing like that. And, the other species of fish that tends to be more of an early season, maybe December, when the ice quite isn't ready for snowmobiles. You got to hoof it out there. Is crappies. There's a crappie population up here for certain spots, if you know where they are. That's, in my opinion, the best eating fish in the entire Gunflint Trail area is the crappies, even better than the walleyes.
I think whitefish too is.
Yes.
Did you ever get that whitefish? Somebody was giving you some heat about. Your uncle was or something, wasn't it?
We did a whitefish. So I love whitefish, by the way. Love eating whitefish. Love catching whitefish. They're like lake trout. And my uncle Gary. So just a brief on whitefish, and then I want to get into crappies because I love pan fishing as well. So my uncle Gary is on this whitefish kick he has been for several years, and he's always like, "Hey, you got to come out in the boat with me and catch whiteys." And I've caught him before. I've caught him in Green Bay. I've caught him all over. But I was like, I got to do it with Gary. But it's just like, how much time can you fit in, right? Gary and I do a ton of pan fishing together. Matter of fact, we crappie fish more than walleye fish together. Gary loves pan fishing. I do too. I grew up like just a panfish dork, right? My family, like when we weren't walleye fishing, like for tournaments and stuff, most of the time we were pan fishing because I love eating panfish, but I also love catching them off docks, whatever. But white fishing. So Gary was just like adamant that I come out white fishing with him on his little secret spots, and he loves it. And he's sending me pictures. So if you know my Uncle Gary, like he doesn't send pictures on the phone. He gives them to my Aunt Bev. Bev puts them on the computer. She emails me the pictures. So like, then he waits till I open the emails, and then he calls me like, "Did you see the pictures Bev sent?" And he's catching all of these giant whitefish in the summer. So I was like, I told Robbie, my son, gotta go do it with Gary. He's just adamant about it. Like every time I see him, right? And he's been doing it for a number of years where he just it's kind of like me with the lake trout on Superior. Like he fell in love with catching whitefish because they are sort of like catching lake trout, and he can catch them in his own backyard. He doesn't have to drive somewhere to catch whitefish. He catches them, on lakes not too far from his house. So Yeah, we went and did it, fell in love with it. And it is sort of like lake trout fishing. You're fishing them deep, using spoons and basic things that you would fish lake trout. Some of them engage like lake trout. Some of them don't engage like lake trout. The similarity is crazy, you know? And so, catching whitefish in the winter is something I love doing. I've gone out to Green Bay. I've caught them in the winter, in Canada. If I got on an absolute pile of lake trout, or an absolute pile of whitefish, and we weren't catching lake trout, I'd do that all day long. I love that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, they'll hit our tip ups, just even minnows sometimes swimming under on a tip up. Like, if you're targeting whitefish, it's a different approach, but they're around on a lot of these lakes that have lake trout in them. You'll bounce into some whitefish sometimes, which is a great way to diversify what you're eating out there too. I know another thing to be mindful of when you're up here ice fishing is that, like, that time you're out with Gary on that late ice, is that you guys were popping all those holes, and you were talking about, kind of jokingly about, hopefully that doesn't open up the lake in that bay or whatever. But up here, when you are out in the wilderness and you're drilling with a hand auger, with a Nils auger or something, you got to know, like, hopefully you're choosing the right spot on the reef, because if there's 28 inches of ice or something, you don't have the luxury like, oh, we're off 10 feet. Or if you do, you got to re-drill. So be mindful of where you're drilling your holes up here. And also, if you're drilling shallower, I've seen it happen twice. You nick a rock on the bottom when you pop through, and that auger's done. It's toast
then
on
you're
the spot.
walking out.
Yeah, it's over.
I have lots of scenarios about that. When I grew up, I had a Mora hand auger, and before I got my Strike Master gas auger, we had a Mora hand auger like everybody had, right? So it was miles ahead of some of my buddies that had the spoon auger. If you guys remember, the spoon auger was terrible. One of my buddies had one, and there would be three of us leaning on it. It would take you a month and a half. I mean, the ice would practically go out before you got through. But I had a Mora auger, but the blades were kind of dull, so you kind of had to get a couple buddies and lean on it, right? And we'd sit out in front of my parents' house and drill our 2 holes and fish. Well, I got smart. I brought a 2 or 3 inch piece of foam that my parents had in their shed, and I would cover our holes and then cover it with snow. That way I didn't have to re-drill as much the next day, right? And because I didn't feel like, sitting there for 20 minutes through 30 inches of ice or whatever, right up to the bottom of the auger, the hand auger. But I remember going ice fishing with my dad, and we were going crappie fishing, and we break out the Mora hand auger, and I'm drilling a hole, and he's like, "Man, those blades are dull." And I said, "Yeah, I've been telling you for like 2 years now that these blades are super dull." So we left the lake, went to the bait shop, bought a pair of blades, $9.99, right? I had been begging my dad for a set of blades, and he just kind of blew it off. And my dad, I don't want to say he's cheap, but like he's frugal, right? He's like, "Oh, you can get some more mileage out of the blades." But it wasn't until he had to go out ice fishing and experience the super dull blades where he was going to front the $9.99 for the new Mora blades. So we got those on there, and it would just like cut like a dream, right? And then fast forward to when I got a Strike Master gas auger, and I know you can't use those in the wilderness area, but I got a gas auger, and it was like I could have ran around that whole lake. That's where ice fishing to me really, where I just fell in love with it. It was when I started drilling holes and I was exploring, and then I got a depth finder. Right? It wasn't just me and a jiggle stick, right? I could actually see fish. And then I knew that drilling holes and checking spots with the depth finder, I could catch more fish. And it was more about exploring than it was just catching the fish. Like, it wasn't just dropping down, "Oh, look at all these crappies I can catch." It was like, wow, these crappies are relating to this winter basin where I had spent, most of the winter just over here, 150 yards trying to target walleyes and perch on this bar. Little did I know that just off the edge of this reef out in this deep basin, it was just absolutely loaded with crappies. So it all became about exploring. And then I just started drilling more holes and exploring. And it all was just for exploration. I wanted to learn where these fish were in the winter. No different than when I got to Mille Lacs Lake. I tell everybody, when I first started guiding full time, I had a great a great summer business built up, but the winter business, ice fishing was just sort of coming online as far as people guiding people in the winter. And so I had to drill a lot of holes. So every day I had off, I spent looking for fish in the winter because I knew where they were in the summer, but I wanted to see how they related to this structure in the winter. I wanted to find the jumbo perch. I wanted to find the burbot. I wanted to find the ciscos. And so drilling holes meant catching more fish. So I just took off and people started like taking note. Like, matter of fact, in the outdoor news, people were writing how it was dangerous that I was drilling all these holes. And like, because I would go through 5-6 tanks of gas in an auger a day. And it was all just for exploration. And I'm still sort of that way today. And that's how I look at technology as well, like forward-facing sonar. A lot of people love it. A lot of people hate it. What I love about it is exploration. I can't believe how shallow some of these fish are. Trout fishing. You want to talk about trout fishing? I love sight fishing for trout. And I couldn't believe how close to the bank I could get. And these trout would be right on that bank. And I know you guys have a lot of great trout resources up here. Let's talk a little crappie fishing, and then I want to get into the trout fishing because just like a lot of other things that I get addicted to, sight fishing for trout is right up there in the winter. I love sight fishing. I remember as a kid, sight fishing in spear houses. My buddies had spear houses, and I wasn't into spearing as much as they were, or their dads were, but I loved angling out of spear houses. And the same is true today. Cutting a giant hole and catching fish is so much fun. So let's talk a little crappie fishing. I don't want to hear about, I do want to hear about your crappie hotspots, but I go all over the place chasing big crappies. I filmed Dialed In Angling. If you look at our last episode, we were up on Red Lake, literally running and gunning down roaming schools of crappies in this vast basin of Red Lake. I will go to a lot of destinations to catch big crappies. If I have to walk miles down a trail in snowshoes, if there's big crappies at the end of that trail, I'm going.
I'll even take the medium ones.
Yeah, me too. But
so
I love chasing crappies in the winter. They're just a species of fish that bite, first of all. And what's cool about Minnesota is there's so many great crappie fisheries. And as you get into Canada and some of the border waters, I've had some phenomenal crappie fishing where it's within 2 to 3 hours of my house. So as soon as you were talking crappies, Paul, it piqued my interest.
Yeah, and I think the crappies up here are a relatively new phenomenon. I don't know how long. They didn't used to be here, and maybe it's 20 years or so. It does sound about right. And then they started to appear, and then there became more and more of them. They tend to be the big basin fish, and I think they behave a little differently than other areas of the state. I personally am going a lot deeper for them than you might, in southern Minnesota, 40 feet even.
Sure.
But yeah, they're fun. Watching them on the finder and seeing a school run through and throw your little whatever down there. And when they're biting, they'll take just about anything you put down there. But sometimes they can be really finicky, and you won't hardly know that crappie's on there. Just a slight tick on your line. And so you kind of got to really pay attention. But yeah, they're fun. I think for early season fishing and for eating, they're my favorite.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, they are a magical fish, and they bite light. Even the aggressive ones, we call it the up bite or whatever. That's what sells, rods, powers, and actions. Different species of line. Different tackle. I would say most anglers out there that are ice anglers, at some point throughout the winter, if they're avid ice anglers, they're going to chase crappies at some point throughout the winter. So it's interesting to hear that, this part of the world has a decent crappie population.
Yeah. So like we were talking about today, Tony, about the awareness of smallmouth bass in Mille Lacs Lake. Like they've always been there, but now it seems like to some people's minds, there's more of them in there. Maybe they're a nuisance, that sort of thing. So Paul's point about the crappie up here, you look at decades ago, the DNR census, there's no crappies in these lakes. It doesn't mean they weren't there. Maybe someone dumped them in with a bucket. That could be the case. But the numbers have increased a little bit. But we are on the very northern edge of their range, obviously in Minnesota, up in Canada. But they grow slow up here. And there's only a handful of lakes that have them. And numbers are never great, but they're catchable numbers up here. But you got to work for them.
Sure. Well, let's get into a little bit of sight fishing trout and some trout talk. And then we're going to have to table this. And I got to get down to Grand Marais and talk to the folks. I want to talk to the folks down at Tourism of Well. I really appreciate you guys talking. I could talk to you guys for the next 4 hours about fishing. It's always interesting to me when you get 4 or 5 fish heads in one room how many different directions the podcast goes. But I do want to ask you guys about trout fishing, because I know we've talked lake trout fishing. I want to talk more stream trout. A couple of years ago, I've done a lot of stream trout fishing my whole life, and ice fishing for them, open water. I'm fishing pits around the Iron Range and just around home. But a few years ago, my buddy really got me turned on to sight fishing. And it's one of those things in the winter too. I've got to do it a couple times a year. There's all sorts of different resources in Minnesota, but I look at like Cook County in this area being like one of the best, right? When you start pulling up maps of like areas where there's stream trout and good numbers of stream trout, and from an ice angler's perspective, it doesn't get much better than this as far as water clarity and sight fishing potential. Can we talk a little bit about sight fishing here? Maybe let's start with Joe, and then we can just work around the panel. Because I am a huge sight fishing trout fan. Like if I could sit there all day. I could sit there for weeks if I didn't have a job. So if I win the lottery, you'll see me sight fishing trout, lake trout fishing, like just overdoing all of these experiences.
Right. I've done sight fishing a few times. Some of the lakes that my favorite brook trout lakes in particular inside the wilderness are really hard to get to, where I don't even bring my Vexilar up there. It's like so hard. But the benefit is I'm catching them in like 3 feet of water, 3, 4, 5. That seems to be the magic zone. So you don't even need a Vexi because the cords dangling would be hitting the bottom almost, or it just gets tangled up right away. But with the sight fishing part of it, it's so great to see this, they come in and the whole staring at it and what it is that makes them cook. It actually, I think, improves your ability for the next time that you go out where you aren't sight fishing, because you kind of get to see what it is that triggers the bite. And so that's a benefit to doing it. But in the wilderness line, I mean, bringing the saw in there, then bringing the shelter in is almost impossible on some of the best lakes inside the boundary waters. But don't let that stop you, like from just because you can't sight fish for them, like go in there. That's still the best fishing is brook trout ice fishing is. I mean, lake trout's my favorite because of the depth and just the whole experience you get with them. But brookies is like right underneath it, or it's a close second.
Well, I've even noticed too, like I don't need the giant hole. Like there's times where I've gone in and just drilled one hole as long as it's clear enough and shallow enough. Because like we talked about earlier in the podcast, I mean, it's amazing to me how shallow those trout will be. I'll cut my hole and I'll be in, let's say I'll be in a sharp drop, and the start of my hole is in 4 feet and the back is, let's say 8 feet or whatever it is. And you're looking up underneath there and you're seeing trout moving in like that 2 foot section, around the rocks. And so, I've just had it where like in a boundary water situation where you just roll one hole, I like to use a shorter rod blank and something I can sit over the top of those fish and jig and still have decent backbone with that rod. And so I'll use like a sight fishing type of rod, and I have just as much fun as that. I mean, there's times where I've been, let's say, perch fishing, for example, sight fishing perch on shallow water flats, where I'll look over the side and throw my coat over the top of me, and I'm just looking for fish to come through. I've done the same thing, like looking for spots where to set up for trout for sight fishing, drilling that one hole and just kind of looking around, scanning around. If the water's clear enough, that's all you need.
Yeah, and I got the first, it was 19 7/8. I still say it's 20-inch brookie. My buddy's like, 19 7/8, man, you got to pinch the tail on that. But there are big brook trout up here too. I mean, just hogs, and they're healthy looking. It's not just these like little stream trout. When you think of stream trout in Minnesota, maybe like a 10-inch brook trout. These are big, fat 20-inch brook trout, 18-inch range. I mean, it's incredible. It's kind of the hidden gem almost, because lake trout get so much attention up here that those brookies are out there and get overlooked a little bit.
Yeah, just seeing the pictures from you guys, social media. I see a lot of people that are posting pictures of those great big brook trout. It gets me fired up.
Yeah, it's fun. And last year's my first foray into sight fishing. Bought my first Nils ice saw for 2 reasons. One, trapping bait. Still trapping minnows through the winter. Needed it for that. Paul and I got a story about that. When my first outing with my brand new Nils ice saw, I dropped it at the bottom of the lake, and we spent an hour fishing it off the bottom of the lake, and we got it. But then I started using it for the sight fishing for rainbows, brook trout, splake. We've got a number of variety of species up here. And just what blew me away was the lures I was using. All these years, I thought they did one thing underneath the ice when I'm jigging them and moving them. But then to see what they're actually doing and how the fish respond to it is the education piece of it that blew me away. But then I likened it to deer hunting, where I'm sitting in a deer stand And I can see off in a distance, we'll be 4, 5, 6 feet of water, but you can see under that ice, especially if it's thin early ice, and you see those fish coming. And that moment, you know when they see the lure and they accelerate and they come in and they start dancing around. That's why I do the sight fishing. It's just the education piece and just that rush of seeing the fish, how they respond. It's just incredible. It's fun.
I had one of the first underwater cameras that came out in like 1997.
Yeah.
It was like this old box and this lens with this viewing system. And obviously cameras have advanced, since then. But I've always been a fan of underwater cameras. And then when I started, like I said, fishing in people's spear houses to cutting bigger holes in the ice, I've just fallen in love with it, not just for trout, but other species as well, because of that education piece of it, learning how fish are reacting. You can see it for yourself. Same's to be said with forward-facing sonar. I get to see their moods, how they react to baits, how they react to noise, just different pressure systems. It's amazing what you learn when you can watch something and you just observe it. And it doesn't even have to be catching them. I could sit over a sight fishing hole and watch you two catch or you three catch trout all day long and just be as excited as if I was catching them myself.
Yeah. It's a blast for sure. The one thing I will say though is that my sight fishing season ends earlier than the fishing season ends, because when you have 24 to 30 inches of ice to cut, I tap out at that point. I like to do it early season, right at the trout opener. As long as I can.
That is the thing of the lakes up here. You get to late February, you could be talking 3 feet of up like last winter. You're up to the auger head. You got no room to spare.
Yeah,
I think most anglers, whether they're people that like spearing, for example, pike, they kind of tap out once the ice gets super thick. Same with sight fishing anglers. That can be said for sight fishing anglers. That sort of puts an end to it when it becomes such a giant task to cut that hole. I think that about wraps it up for us, guys. I appreciate you guys' insight into the area, your enthusiasm. Driving up that Gunflint today has me fired up for this entire area. There's so much exploring that I still need to do as a person, a human, a fisherman, whether it's in the Boundary Waters canoe area, outside the area, all around Cook County. These grouse are calling my name. Grouse openers this next weekend. I can't go grouse hunting. I have to guide this weekend, but grouse will be on my mind. So when my head hits the pillow tonight, I will be thinking about grouse because of all these Cook County grouse that are running around here. So thank you very much, guys. Anything else you want to add to the podcast?
No, just
come out ice fishing with us.
I will. I'm definitely coming. I mean, just like Lake Superior, this region is not that far from my house. I mean, this is like just an area. I don't know what it is, but it's just like you start getting busy in life and kids are in sports and in our realm, like I'm heading to Cloquet, Esco, Duluth every time we have sports or something going on. It's not that much further. And I will definitely be up here fishing. I'd love to get up here with Dialed In Angling and do something with you guys. It's been an awesome experience. You'll see me on the Gunflint sometime. You might even see me in Blaze Orange here not too long, looking for rough grouse. So thanks again, guys. Stay tuned. We got more Dialed In Angling coming up next. OnX Fish is the best tool I have ever used for finding new lakes to target. Quickly filter lakes by species, then select trophy potential, high abundance, keeper potential, or high stocking effort to find the fish you are after in the size and the numbers you are trying to catch. Download from the App Store today to get research tools for the serious anglers and beginners alike, giving you the data to target the right lakes and the confidence to get there. Use tools like recent imagery, fishing hotspot data, or the best-in-class weather features that call out current wind, weather, barometer, moon phase, majors and minors, along with precip and more. OnX Fish is a phenomenal tool both on and off the water for discovering new fishing opportunities, many of which you'd never known existed. Download OnX Fish Midwest today, the app that is changing the game on ice and open water.
Visit Cook County, Minnesota, a year-round fishing destination like no other. Spring brings steelhead and smelt runs along the Lake Superior shoreline. In summer, cast for walleye, lake trout, and northern pike in the region's inland lakes and rivers. As the leaves change, so does the fishing, with fall offering some of the best lake trout action around. When winter settles in, grab your gear and head out for ice fishing in a true northern wilderness setting. Whether you're an experienced angler or just discovering the joy of casting a line, Cook County has a spot and a season for you. Learn more and start planning your fishing trip at visitcookcounty.com.
Arneson's Rocky Point Resort in northern Minnesota offers a little something for everyone. Nestled on Lake of the Woods South Shore, it provides easy access to 14 remarkable reefs. Serious anglers know that Arneson's offers some of the best fishing, charter fishing, and small boat fishing options, all supported by the largest protected marina on the lake's South Shore. Accommodation selections range from 1 to 5 bedrooms. Equipped with all the modern conveniences, guests can enjoy a delightful dining experience and stunning lake views at the Rock Harbor Lodge, an on-site, full-service bar and restaurant. The 2 beaches provide hours of fun for the whole family. Whether you're seeking an idyllic fishing spot or a relaxing vacation, Arneson's Rocky Point has everything you need. Check them out at arnesonsresort.com. Okay, I'm going to wrap up this podcast. Went down to downtown Grand Marais. It's bustling with people up there going to see the leaves. People are fishing. They're checking out the shops. What a cool area. What a great experience. Just to do a road trip up the North Shore again and sort of experience or just scratch the surface of really what Cook County has to offer has been fun. To be able to just take that road back up the Gunflint, to be able to interview and sit down with passionate anglers, such as Joe and Chad and Paul. Just a little bit of a background on all three. I mean, you heard in the podcast, they're obviously, just love the area. They fell in love with it at some point in their lives and had moved there and live up the Gunflint and just love living that lifestyle. And I can see why. When you drive up that road, that's historic Gunflint Trail, and you see all the lodges and the outfitters and just the overall vast wilderness, kind of that drive in there. It's just nothing but vastness and wilderness in that part of the world. It's just a special place in Minnesota and a special place in the world. So thanks to those guys, like Chad, for example, from the Gunflint Wilderness Guide Service, took me out on the lake and we tooled around. He showed me all sorts of areas, basically where the boundary waters started, where you can go with 10 horsepower motors, kind of walk me through the process of getting permits and just seeing all the islands and beauty of that. Hats off to him. I really want to thank him for that. And I appreciate it. And then, of course, Joe Friedrichs from Paddle and Portage podcast for jumping on and sharing, his knowledge of the area, his passion for the area, obviously ice fishing, and getting to talk about that. I know for me, for dialed in angling purposes, but just me personally, getting up there to fish that area in the winter, I'm definitely going to make it a priority. And of course, Paul, he's an avid angler, like you said, a career retired guy right now, enjoying life, enjoying that area, and just taking it in every single day. I talked to Paul off air as we were leaving, as I was leaving Chad's house, and he was just pumped. He had been fishing and just doing his thing for the past 8 weeks and just loving life, going to different bodies of water and catching fish. You can really tell when you sit down with those guys how passionate they are for that area. So I really want to thank them for being on the podcast. And then lastly, Cook County Tourism for not only sponsoring the show, but, bringing me up there and experiencing again. Because as I was up there, it just sort of sparked my memory of all the cool things that area has to offer. I'm already thinking of things I can do this fall with the leaves changing and seeing all the people enjoying, everything that area has to offer as far as state parks and sightseeing. I want to take my family up there. This rejuvenation I have for lake trout fishing on Lake Superior, and now going up that Gunflint Trail, the whole drive back, all I can think about now is just how to get back to that area, how special it is, and really how short a drive it is, right up 35 and then Highway 61, right up to Arrowhead. We're lucky to have that sort of place in Minnesota, something that we can enjoy. That's why I love this state. I say it all the time on this podcast. I live in Minnesota because I absolutely love fishing. I love the resources we have. how diverse this state is, and we're truly fortunate to have something like that in our backyard. So thanks for tuning in. Good luck fishing to everybody. We're going to have more fall adventures next week. It was great to get up the North Shore. I know for me, I will be getting back as quick as possible to check out the leaves, but also sort of work in a lake trout trip, or maybe even get up and do a little trout fishing with the guys up there. So until next week, I'm Tony Roach. This has been the Dialed In Angling Podcast.